Oh man, do I regret making this video? Do I regret making all the previous videos that we have talked about when it comes to Jeff Petry? Because man, oh man, talk about the Marty St. Louis effect. It's not just Cole Caulfield who has gone out there and absolutely exploded offensively under the new head coach. It's the entire line, pretty much. There's Anderson, there's Suzuki, they're all doing really well. And then you have, of course, on the blue line, the subject of today's video, Jeff Petry himself. Jeff Petry, at the time of recording this audio, has 11 points in 45 games played. Okay, that's a big decline from what he had last season, 42 points in 55 games. It's a big decline from the season before that, 40 points, 71 games. The season before that, 46 points, 82 games, 42 points in 82 games in 2017-18. Jeff Petry has not had as bad of an offensively productive season as this year since 2016-17, which was 5 years ago. But that 11-point mark is kind of misleading because in the recent 5 games played Petry has, that's where 5 of his points came from. Jeff Petry is all of a sudden no longer the really just absent-minded, shoot the puck into the shin pads defenseman like I was talking about the previous few videos throughout the past year. It's funny because Jeff Petry is all of a sudden like, oh boy, do I want to say he's back? Feels like he's back, is it not? And I think a lot of people going out there and watching the Canadiens games have kind of come to the same conclusion that Jeff Petry this season was never really, like, bad, per se. It's just the way this guy was being used and the way he felt he was being used became so evident that now, under a different head coach, under a different system where they're allowed to make reads and defensemen are allowed to actually contribute offensively, you can see that Jeff Petry has sort of found his game back. I saw a lot of people going out there and saying, okay, maybe Jeff Petry just really gave up on Dominique Ducharme. You know, you saw them arguing on the bench sometimes. You saw the conflict there. Who knows if Petry internally, just for lack of a better word, gave up when he was playing under Dominique Ducharme. Not because he sucked, but because he just didn't want to do well anymore, because he didn't feel like he could. Now Jeff Petry is back, and it's why this video is so difficult for me to make, because when it comes to the entire season so far, Jeff Petry has only played X amount of games under Marty St. Louis. His entire season so far has been burdened by the first half of Dominique Ducharme and his tenure. Therefore, when it comes to a trade conversation for Petry, all of a sudden the Canadiens have a bigger decision to make as to whether or not they still want to go out there and trade this player away. Jeff Petry is making $6.25 million a season till the end of 2025. He's 34 years old right now, meaning that the contract goes on till he's 37, and a lot of people were going out there being all concerned. Okay, he had 40 points in 4 straight years. He had that 42-point mark in 55 games last year, which is fantastic, but this season he declined. So if Montreal's going to go full rebuild and they trade this guy, any team that's going to go out there and acquire Petry needs to think they're getting the Petry of old and not the Petry of under Dominique Ducharme in 2021-2022. Fortunately for all those teams, though, it appears that Petry, based off of the way he has played in the past week or so, has really gotten back up to speed, which probably goes out there and incentivizes any other team to go out there and trade for him more. But what it also does is it gives the Canadiens a little bit more of a difficult decision to make as to whether or not they should actually trade this guy. Now, if you're fully committed to the rebuild and, you know, actually going out there and getting draft picks and getting Shane Wright and all that, then you might go out there and say, okay, trade Petry, trade Gallagher, trade X, trade Y, trade Z, whatever. Who really knows? But the point is, Montreal is in a difficult spot because all of a sudden Petry is good again. So do you really want to go out there and let 5 games dictate whether or not this guy stays or goes? Either way, we have a conversation to have about the trade list, because when it comes to that 4th period article that I was talking about in the previous video, this is David Pagnotta's trade watch list for 2021-2022 top 35, updated 2 days ago. Jeff Petry is indeed included on the list. Now, Ben Sherratt is too, but he's in a different boat because, yeah, it's been very open that he's been on the trade block for a while. But when it comes to Jeff Petry, let's read what David Pagnotta has to say about him. Petry hasn't formally requested for a trade, per Habs GM Ken Hughes, but the 34-year-old D-man would welcome a change of scenery after a tumultuous season led by pandemic restrictions in Quebec that resulted in his family returning to their home in the U.S. Hughes said he is willing to move Petry if the right deal presents itself. Petry has 3 more years left on his contract, and he comes with a $6.25 million salary cap hit. He also owns a 15-team no-trade list. Teams reportedly linked, though, are the Dallas Stars and the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, Dallas is a team we have talked about before. We had the entire conversation with John Klingberg as to whether or not Dallas could swing a trade with Montreal involving these two names, and I said in that video that that was a ridiculous idea. I was criticizing the guy who went out there and said it, but then like 2 days later, I think it was said the same thing on like TSN or whatever it was. So yeah, apparently that idea is a lot more potent than I thought it was. Klingberg for Petry, but you know what? I'm going to go out there and say this right here. Because of how well Jeff Petry has been playing as of late, all of a sudden that Klingberg thing doesn't really strike the same, alert bells that it did previously. I don't really feel that same sense of, are you serious? Anymore. Mostly because Petry has kind of shown off, he's still got it. Like, he's still not that bad of a player. So all of a sudden it's a lot more believable to me to consider the idea of a Klingberg for Petry trade because, hey, Petry signed for a long time. He is also effective. Klingberg is short term. He's not going to re-sign in Dallas. Dallas wants to trade this guy because they want to get assets for him while they can because they don't want to lose him for nothing and all that stuff. So who knows? I'm just kind of throwing Klingberg's name out there because that's a conversation we already had. If you want to go out there in the comments and say, okay, no, let's make a Petry trade with Dallas for somebody else, like a prospect they have that's pretty good. There's a Maverick Bourque that's in their system that I really do like. There's also a Logan Stankoven that is fantastic too. The Dallas Stars have had some pretty good underrated drafting stories over the past few years, to be honest, so I would definitely not be surprised if Kent Hughes and co. thought that the Stars and the prospects they had were valuable enough to go out there and consider a Petry trade. But also talking about the other team over here, Philadelphia, this is a different team than the ones that we have been seeing for all these Petry conversations, because Philadelphia is kind of in their own position too. The team isn't doing all too well. If you take a look at the Eastern Conference and the Metro standings, they are second last, behind New Jersey in that respect. And they have themselves a right-handed problem on defense that has really kind of carried a lot of the conversation about this team. Actually, no, I take that back. The Claude Giroux thing is probably a bigger story, is it not? But Rasmus Ristolainen is expiring this season. Who really knows that they're going to bring him back? They also have themselves Ryan Ellis, who is injured at the moment, and you take a look at the rest of their decor, Braun, Yandel, Connaughton, Sealer, all UFAs. It's only Ellis, Provorov, and Sanheim who are sticking around here. So there is a little bit of a discussion to be had as to whether or not you want to go out there and acquire anybody that can actually have a longer-term contract on this team. Whether or not you would go out there and force Ristolainen into free agency in order to get a Petry back and replace him on the right side. There are a lot of questions, not too many answers, and I know a lot of Flyers fans specifically have gone out there and expressed their disinterest in acquiring Petry because he's a little bit too old, and he may be seen as a little bit too uncertain for the contract. I mean, the Flyers and the rest of their decor are already making a pretty significant amount of money. You have yourselves that Ryan Ellis making 6.25, you have Provorov making 6.75, Sanheim's making 4.6, so there's already a pretty decent amount of moolah going around with this team, and that's not even including Ristolainen, who's making 5.4. Who knows if you bring him back? So Philadelphia is a lot more of an interesting conversation to me, but if you were to go out there and acquire a Jeff Petry, let's try to fill in the blanks as to what a trade could look like. The Flyers do have some prospects that I do like for sure. Bobby Brink has been one of my favorites ever since that 2019 NHL Entry Draft, but I know Flyers fans do not want to touch him. He's been fantastic in the NCAA. I believe he leads the league in points. Something like that. Of course, you have that Cam York, but he's a defenseman that could probably go out there and help the Flyers with that blue line of theirs. Tyson Forrester is a guy who's got a heavy shot. You have yourselves Emil Andre. And then going back to previous drafts, you have some names that I've been a lot more of a fan of compared to others, like Morgan Frost, for example. Now, we know he's not a prospect anymore, but I always did believe in the potential he did have. And for Montreal, I mean, they're not really all too hesitant to take smaller players. So either way, talk to me in the comments what do you think about Jeff Petry being linked to the Stars and the Flyers. If you're a fan of either of these teams, tell me in the comments what it is you would trade for a Petry, or if you even want Petry in the first place. If you don't want him, please let me know in the comments as well why that is the case. If you're a Habs fan, what would you want from either of these two teams? Dallas and Philadelphia both have some pretty good prospects, or you could also let me know in the comments, do you even want to trade Petry anymore? This guy has been pretty good under Dominique Ducharme, or excuse me, not Dominique Ducharme, my goodness, under Marty St. Louis, and it kind of gets me wondering what could have been if we just had St. Louis the entire time. Like, do you think Cole Caulfield would have won the Calder? Oh man, that's the second time I've mentioned something like that in a video like this, eh? I guess we're gonna have to talk about that soon. Talk about the comments either way. All your thoughts about Petry, the Stars, the Flyers, prospects, the Canadiens, and what a trade should look like. I hope you enjoyed this video, 99, and bye.